So if you'll open, please, your Chumashim, it's chapter 23, Parashat Haye Sarah. It's 112. No, I don't know what 112 is, but chapter 23, page 106 in your Chumashim, Parashat Haye Sarah. You might have a different Chumash than everybody else, which is possible. No, right there. Page, it should be page 106. Is it 106? Yeah, no, Chaf Gimel. Chapter 23, page 106 in Bereshit, Parashat Haye Sarah. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to read the first pasuk. Vayihiyu Haye Sarah, and the years of the lives of Sarah were me'ah shana, ve'esrim shana, ve'sheva shanim. They were 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. Sheneh Haye Sarah, the years of Sarah's life. This opening verse for Parashat Haye Sarah is wrought with linguistic discrepancies. Vayihiyu, the word Vayihiyu happens to add up to the number 37. 37 is the amount of years that Sarah lived as a mother to Yitzchak. She was 90 when she had him and 127 when she died. And maybe part of the understanding of the Vayihiyu could be she truly lived once she had her son, once she was a mother to Yitzchak. The word shana, shanim, sheneh, 4 times the same word is appearing in one verse. It's considered a min la mancha. It's a word that is recurring, and it doesn't just mean years. It means that throughout a person's life, throughout the phases of their years, there needs to be more than just time, the passage of time. The word shana has within it the word shinui, which is change, which means that as we live our lives, like Sarah, there has to be a constant sense of evolving, a constant change, a constant growth, a constant improvement. There are very famous midrashim that say why they separated, and they said 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. And, you know, the famous Rashi, at 100, she had certain qualities as a 20-year-old, and as a 20-year-old, she had the qualities of a 7-year-old, whether it was few sins, whether it was beauty. Regardless, one of the things we're going to see, and we'll see it even with the words in this parasha of Abraham, Ba Bayamim, it means that we don't freeze time. We don't get frozen in a certain stage, in a certain era, in a certain age. Ba Bayamim, like Sarah, she brings her 7-year-old self to her 20-year-old persona. And she brings those selves to her 100-year-old self. So when we travel through life, we don't shed and leave ourselves behind. Vayihiyu Haye Sarah. Sarah was the person that lived many lives, but she brought all her lives into each other so that she could be the beautiful 7-year-old and the fertile 20-year-old and the wise 100-year-old all together. And this is where we're starting our parasha, with this idea of Sarah. It's interesting to note also that her years, the 127, that particular number finds itself in Megillat Esther, where King Ahashverosh was the king over 120 provinces, Sheva Esrim Umea Medina, if you'll remember the Megillah. And maybe this is starting to tell us their interrelationship between Sarah and all the women that are to follow. She's our first matriarch. She's the first one that we look to emulate, all the way down. Don't think that by the time you got to Esther, way later on in our history, that there isn't a connection to this Sarah Imenu also, because she's going to be the queen. She's going to rule over 127 nations or countries. And Sarah dies in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, in Eretz Canaan. And Abraham comes to mourn for her, veliv kota, and to cry for her. And we see this word, and sometimes we notice that the Torah does this interesting thing, and it takes one letter and it shrinks it. Sometimes you'll see, like in the Shema, where there are letters that are enlarged. In this case, when Abraham comes to mourn for the loss of his life partner of Sarah, he doesn't just eulogize her, but liv kota. He cries for her, but the Torah, in all of its sensitivity, decides to write the word for crying for her with the small chaf. You'll see it in the third line, second to last word. There's even like a little asterisk over that chaf. And maybe just from a humanitarian standpoint, maybe the Torah is speaking to us and saying, I understand that there are emotions that come together with loss, and there's grief. And I understand that that grief could be something that is very, very difficult and very, very hard for you to bear. But I also realize, says the Torah, that sometimes when you go into the grief modality, you get trapped there and you can get stuck there. And be careful. And we know from our laws of mourning of the Shiv'ah, and then the Shloshim, and then sometimes the year, depending on who had passed, we know that these practices for mourning have limitations. And maybe therefore, if we see this word kota with a small chaf, it means yes, you should cry, but it should be limited. And maybe even the way the kaf is shaped, it shows an opening to move forward. The letter itself is an invitation to say, there is, can you hear me? That it's open, the letter is open, and it just gives this breath. It gives this idea that maybe you need to breathe, maybe you need some oxygen, maybe you need to go out. The letter is shaped like a box, but it has its opening to tell the person who's in pain, who's in grief, who's in a place of suffering, that you don't need to stay in that box forever. You shouldn't stay in that box forever. You need to come out of the box. And that's what Abraham is going to do. He can't move forward. His life is on pause. There would be a sense of paralysis from the grief if there isn't a forward movement, if there isn't an effort to come out of it and away from it. And when that letter is shrunken, the next word we see is Vayakom Abraham me'al penei meto. What does Abraham do? Because he was able to contain and limit the grief aspect, Vayakom. And there's going to be a lot of this word in this week's Parashat. Everybody's going to rise to the occasion. It's a beautiful word that we've played with before. We'll talk about it a little bit as we engage it again. But he's able to come up me'al penei meto. He's not discounting or minimizing the fact that he had a loss, that there was a death in his family. But what does he do? He is able to rise up because there's things that need to happen. He needs to bury his wife. These are functions that if you stay in the grief process, you won't be able to perform. So he gets up and he speaks to Bnei Chet. And what he tells them is very beautiful, because what he tells Bnei Chet is how we should be seeing ourselves as well. What does that mean? He gets up and he says, Ger vetoshav anochi imachem. At this point, in this place in our history, Avraham is a ger. He came from another land. He came from Ur Kasdim. He is not a citizen yet in the land. And so he acknowledges who he is. And he says, I am a ger, but at the same time, I am a toshav, I am a resident. I may not yet be a citizen, but I am from a foreign place. I do reside amongst you. And therefore, I'm asking for an achuzat keved. I would like to have a holding. I want to have the permission to buy land here. And I want to bury my deceased. And B'nai Chet answer Abraham and say, what do you mean? Listen to us. Adoni, Nisi Elohim ata betochenu. You're not a nobody. You're not just a foreigner. You're not just a resident. You are a prince amongst us. Please take the greatest, take the choicest of our burial places in order to bury your wife or your deceased. And nobody would withhold a single space from you. And we see this word again, Vayakom Avraham. He was already up, but he is uplifted. Now, whether the people uplifted him by spelling out how they feel about him, or whether he was just once again resuming his initial Vayakom, and he bows to them and he says, Im yesh, please, if you have it within your souls, I would like to bury my wife, but please could you contact Efron ben Sochar for me? Can you get in touch with him for me? Because I want to take the cave, the Ma'arat HaMachpelah that he has in the center of his field. I'm willing to pay the full going rate for it, but I do want to own it as an achuzah. This is purchasing land. This is a very, very big moment in Jewish history where even though God had promised Abraham the land, he's going to make an effort of kinyan, of purchasing it, of having a proof that he invested in this land. And until today, you can't contest that Ma'arat HaMachpelah belongs to the Jewish people. That's one of the sites that's not contestable. And he wants to pay for it. Now, Ephron at the time is sitting amongst the people of Chet, and Ephron comes to Abraham and he speaks be'ozne b'nei Chet. He speaks in the ears. And why is he speaking in the ears? He wants to, whenever we say ozne, we think of what? Of weights, of moznayim. He wants to balance the situation. What is the balance that he's going to create? He speaks to everybody who's there and he says, no, 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 please listen to me. Take the sadeh and take the me'ara that's in it. Take both the field and the cave. Consider it a gift and please go ahead and do what you need to do with your burial. And Abraham bows down to everybody and he speaks to Ephron in the ears also of everybody present, which goes to say that if you wanted to learn a halachic understanding from how transactions happen, you need witnesses. And so therefore, Abraham takes the very people that are standing there and he uses them as his witnesses and he speaks in the ears of the people and he says, no, I must pay with money. You have to take my money from me so that I can proceed with the burial. And Ephron tells him the famous question and he says, oh, please, Abraham, 400 shekel kesef, 400 shekel kesef, beni u bencha mahi. What are we talking about here? Don't be ridiculous. What do we, with a couple of the 100 shekels? Meanwhile, we know, the reader, that 400 shekel kesef was an exorbitant amount. But by saying that it's nothing, you don't have to pay me $4 million. What's $4 million amongst friends? He's actually putting a price. And Abraham takes out the full amount. He counts it out in front of him. Vayishkol Abraham le'Ephron et hakesef, in front of Bnei Chet. This is another rule, another law Another etiquette we should learn, when you're paying, you count out the money in front. I mean, today we have checks and wire transfers, but back then, you don't just hand somebody a sack of coins and say, he has 400 shekel kesef. Count it. Count it in front of me and with a witness, because the day of tomorrow, you don't want them to come back and say, wow, you know that bag that you gave me, it only had 280, not 400, and now you have nothing to go back on. So you want to make sure that things are done in a appropriate way. And the most beautiful part of the whole thing, because we've been following this word in verse 17, Vayakum Sede Ephron. It seems that as Abraham is rising, and as he's rising to the occasion to purchase a place for his wife and to properly give her a proper burial, you know what also happens? And they use this, and since it's a story about a wedding that we're about to come upon, it's a very beautiful idea that the more you pay for something, the more value it has, not just to you, but the more value you give to the object. And what do I mean by that? By spending all this money on the Sadeh of Ephron, the Sadeh of Ephron, my mother was just telling me the other day, did you know that the trees, did you know that the plants, do you know that they have feelings? I said, yeah, of course, I saw Pocahontas. What do you think? I don't know that every inanimate object has an emotion, has an energy to it. Of course it does. And now Ephron Achiti's land, because Abraham paid a high price for it, it's standing a little straighter, it's standing a little taller. And it gives us this sense that we can't take inanimate objects. And I use this example. There was a beautiful story about a man who wanted to acquire a bride. Back in the day, you would pay the father of the bride. You'd give, let's say the going rate was 10 camels. And this man decided to give 20 camels for his wife. And the wife tells the husband, what'd you give my father 20 camels for? He would have taken 10. And he said, because you're not worth 10 camels. I want you to know your worth and your value to me. And when the woman knows what her value is, then she rises to the occasion and she sees herself. Again, not that 20 camels is anything to, but the concept, and we're going to see it now also when Abraham is going to seek out a wife for his son Yitzchak. There's a very important idea that we have to give kavod. And when we give kavod and we give honor and respect, what ultimately happens is that now these people have a sense of self-respect and they have a different world view as well. So we have this Vayakom Sedeh Ephron. I wanted you to see it in verse 17. And then when we get to verse 20 as well, Vayakom Hasadeh Vehame'ara. Not only does the Sadeh rise up, and you can imagine the imagery, if this was a movie, all of a sudden the earth is shifting, the Sadeh is rising, and not only does the Sadeh rise, but then in the next few verses, the Ma'ara itself, the cave itself, elevates itself, and this becomes an Achuzat Kever. This becomes a land that we own. Now we can get into that was the funeral. Just so you know, the Parashat is flanked with two funerals. We have Sarah dies in the beginning, and Abraham dies at the end of the Parashat. In the middle, where I want to spend most of our time, we have a wedding. And so that's where I'm going to take you now. Chapter 24, Avraham Zaken Baba Yamim. I had quoted this verse earlier. Avraham it's unusual. We know that he had been called a Zaken by Sarah, or he had seen himself as a Zaken when he was going to have a child. But now the Torah is calling him a Zaken, and they say that until Abraham, people didn't show signs of aging. But also they say that because this is all Midrash, I'm not usually the Midrash type, but I'll throw it in for the sake of this verse. They also say that it was so coincidental, air quotes, that Sarah should get pregnant after being with Abimelech. Right afterwards, she gets pregnant and has a baby, and there was talk around town that maybe Abraham wasn't the father. So what happened? God made sure that Abraham would look exactly like his father Abraham. But then they were mistaking. I mean, Yitzchak would look like his father Abraham. But then they were mistaking who's who, which is which. And so Abraham started to age so they would know which is, it's a midrash. But the purpose of the midrash is not just that. It's to start to tell us that Abraham is Zaken Baba Yamim. He, like Sarah, he brought his days with him. And maybe it's also an idea to say that if you make it to this stage, to the Zaken, it's okay to bring all yourselves with you. And it's okay for you to resemble the age that you are. I'm not saying that you should let yourself go. I'm not a proponent of that. We'll go back to Sarah. Everybody has to try and always look their best. But bringing your life history with you is something that is beautiful and admirable. And Hashem had blessed Abraham Bakol. They say Bakol means the fact that he had a child. That was his greatest blessing. But he goes and he calls for his servant, Zekan Beto, also Eliezer. And we should know this because I don't know how you picture Eliezer in your mind, but he is the elder of Abraham's house. He is practically a noble figure for us. He's so noble that when Abraham was told he's going to have children, or when Abraham was told he's going to be blessed with the land, Abraham answers, right now, the one who's going to inherit is Damesek Eliezer, is this Eliezer. Now, I may slip a couple of times and call this man Eliezer, but just so we know for the sake of accuracy, this Zekan Beto, this Eved, this Ish, Rashi and most of the commentaries identify as Eliezer, but his name Eliezer is not mentioned. We make that connection for ourselves. So if we wanted to be accurate, we would call him the Ish or the Eved, which is also very interesting because it's very, very similar. What are you looking for? Oh, yes, you're looking in the commentary. So she's saying that at this stage, Yitzchak was 37 years old, which tells us further that this is where the commentaries come and say that Sarah died while Abraham was up the mountain doing the Akedah. Sarah had died because he's still the same age he was during the Akedah. And then you go into the other midrashim, which I think we've had our fill for midrashim for one day, but I'll just add this piece that either Sarah died from the news that her son was being brought up as an altar. Supposedly the angel of death came and gave her that news and she died. And some people fix it and they say, yeah, she heard the news, but her heart leapt out of her soul because her soul left her heart because she was so touched that her child would be a korban tamim. If you want to make it, spin it to the positive, that she was so, neither spin is nice because she ends up dying. Forget the spins. Let's move forward. Abraham, the whole thing is, I understand it's a response to her having a heart attack. So instead of her going in such a desperate way, they want you to understand that she left the world in a happy way. Again, they all midrashim, and that's why I don't usually engage and get too caught up in them. But since we mentioned it, I figured I'd put it out there. I want you to see what Abraham instructs his servant to do for him. And look at in verse 3, he says, actually verse 2, Simna yadecha tachat yerechi. This was a way of swearing in the past. You'd put your hand on somebody's thigh, ve'ashbi'acha. Let me have you swear, be'Hashem Elohei hashamayim ve'Elohei haaretz. All of this is linguistically binding language. You're going to make a swear in the name of the God of the heavens and the God of the earth that you're not going to take for my son from Binot HaKnaani, from the daughters of Canaan, the land that I live amongst. But what do I want you to do? So we should stop for a minute and say, what's so bad about Canaan? Why is he so anti the daughters of Canaan? What do we know, the reader, about Canaan? You remember when Noah came out of the Teva? You remember what it had said about the children that Noah had born? I'll give it to you quickly just so you see. Vayu b'nei Noach, if you're following along, it's in chapter 9, verse 18. It's in the blue books, page 42. It says that the children of Noach that came out of the Teva was Shem, Ham, and Yafet. We already knew that. We knew who went in, so we knew who came out. But then it gives an extra line and it says, V'cham hu avi Canaan. But Ham is the father of Canaan. If we don't want to marry from the children of Canaan, it means we don't want to marry from the children of Ham. Why don't we want to marry from the children of Ham? Because Ham is the one that is cursed. When Noach finally speaks, he says in verse 25, Arur Canaan Eved Avadim Yiyeh. We had learned a couple of years ago that the way that this story could be read is possibly that Noach's wife gave birth to Canaan, but that Noach was not the father, that it was actually Ham who, when he saw his mother's nakedness, it really meant that he did something that impregnated her, and that this child that was born to Noach's wife, don't think it's Noach's son, because otherwise, why would you tell me, V'cham hu avi Canaan? Why would you have to tell that to me? You're telling that to me, and then you're telling me how it came to be that Noach's wife should give birth to a child that was fathered by her own child, Ham, which is the most incestuous that we could discuss. But I only wanted to bring you here so that we could get a sense of what Abraham is saying. He's not just saying, I'm a snob and I only want to marry nobility. He's not saying, I only want to marry my own family. He's saying, I want to make sure that we don't marry into a family that's cursed and destined to be Avadim. But what he's really saying is, the person that Yitzhak marries is going to carry my torch. Sarah is gone. There's only two of us left, me and Yitzhak. And I am Zaken Baba Yamim. I'm on the older side at this point. We only have Yitzhak left. And whoever is going to come into Yitzhak's life is going to create a child that's going to be the future. We have to be very careful with the genetic makeup of who this person's going to be. And so therefore, notice what he says. He says, El artzi ve'el moladeti telech. He's saying something huge when he uses these words. He could just say, go back to Artzi. Or he could have just said, go to Nachor. Or he could have said, he says specifically, besides El Artzi ve'el moladeti telech, what is that already echoing? Lech lecha, me'artzecha, mimoladetecha, right? And he thought he didn't say mibet avicha. In verse 7, he says, what? Make sure Hashem Elohei Hashamayim asher lekachani mibet avi u'mieretz moladeti. What is he saying? He's saying my lech lecha needs to continue. I started a process in the beginning of Parashat Lech Lecha, and that process needs to be continued. And in order for it to continue, we're going to have to start from my starting point, which is exactly where Nachor is, which is where Abraham had started. And what's so beautiful and so interesting is that the Eved first asks this question, but what if the woman doesn't want to come after me? What if she wants to stay where she is? And Abraham says, swear to me that you won't take my son there. The lech lecha that I did to come here is not to be reversed. Don't take my son there. You need to bring somebody else who's willing to make a lech lecha. What are we actually looking for? Beknownst or unbeknownst to Abraham, you know who he's looking for? He's looking for himself. He's looking for the next version of himself. He's looking for someone who's going to do a lech lecha, who's going to leave her family behind. We want to say that he's looking for another Sarah, and we will see that the text makes it very clear that Rivka steps right into the role of Yitzchak's mother, of Sarah, and he's comforted for his mother. But maybe what we may not have realized, and this is also very interesting, when people are looking for the future, they're looking for somebody who resembles them or resembles their values. And Abraham's value of being willing to leave and chart a new future and leave the past culture behind is what we're going to end up finding. When we meet Rivka, we're going to get, so I'm every woman, she's every woman. It's all in her. And she's not only every woman, she doesn't only possess the roots and the estates and all the people who follow her, and Sarah, who was before her, she's also going to grab and add to her checklist, add to her resume, that she also checks all the boxes of the qualities of Avraham Avinu. So let's meet her. She's a very, very exciting personality to meet. Let's continue, since we're doing it in a story-like form. In verse 10, the Eved takes 10 camels with him from the camels of his master. And he takes, and this is also a very beautiful concept, he takes all of the tools, all of the goodies, let's say. He takes gold, he takes all types of valuable items with him. If you're going to bring a girl into your household, you need to bring her and woo her and bedeck her in the fashion that she is going to rise to be. So he is saying, you're going to be a princess. Whoever is going to marry Yitzchak is going to be treated in a certain way and is also going to be expected to fill that role. And here, look what happens. He goes to, by Yaakov. Didn't I tell you everybody's rising to the occasion? So he's also rising. He goes to Aram Naharayim, to the city of Nahor. When we call the place the city of Nahor, make no mistake, Aram Naharayim, probably somewhere in Syria. In Syria. Yeah, well, definitely north. Where exactly the borders lie, I couldn't say. But if it's called the city of Nahor, what does that tell you? When we meet Rivka, who's the granddaughter of Nahor, because she's the daughter of Betuel, who's the son of Nahor, the son of Milcah and Nahor. When we meet Rivka, I don't want you to think for 1 second that she is this little servant girl and she's accustomed to doing all of this arduous labor. Rivka is the daughter of nobility. It's the city of Nahor that she lives in. And so we start to think, the daughter of Paro, we start to think along the lines. I want to now widen our, when we hear this kind of story and it's going to be told to us twice, the Torah is giving all of us a sense of not only the drama that takes place, but this drama is going to repeat itself. We're going to have, let's say, the daughter of Pharaoh, who's going to also do a life-sustaining action by the water also. We're going to have a lot of this. We're going to see that they're going to meet by the well, and it's a famous understanding that that's, the best place if you want to find a guy is by the water cooler, right? Is by the well. That's where Yaakov goes. That's where Yosef goes. That's where Moshe goes. We have a lot of shidduchim that take place by the water. But I want you to think of it in terms a little more, I want to get maybe a tiny bit psychological or a little bit, let's look at it together and we'll see what comes from it. So he goes to the city of Nahor, and he leaves his camels outside of the city by the Be'er Mayim, and it's already evening time, which is the time that the Sho'evot, that the women who are going to draw water are going to come draw water. And at this point, we have the famous Excuse me. We have the famous plea of Eliezer. And what does he say? He said, Hashem Elohe Adoni Abraham. I'm going to pray to the God of Abraham. Hakre na lefanai. Make a mikveh. Thank you. Make a mikveh. What does a mikveh mean? What's pity? Happen. Make it happen. Make it a mikveh today, and do a chesed for my servant Abraham. He's not saying that he's worthy of having something unusual transpire for him. He's saying, Im Adoni, I meant he's the servant and his Abraham is his master. Do it for my master Abraham. And then he says these words. Please, these are every person's words. If you only leave with these three words, Dayenu. He says, Hine Anochi Nitzav. I think they might be my three favorite words in succession. I don't know what to do with myself. What does Hine mean? I am aware, God, that you are here. Hine. The word Hine means there is, like Hineni. When God says Abraham or calls you, you answer Hineni, you say, I am present. But what you're really saying when you say Hineni is I am in your presence. The word Hine is a recognition that you are in the presence of God. So what is the servant saying? Hine Anochi, God, I know who you are. I also know who I am. I know I possess Anochi. I may just be the servant of Abraham, but I also know that because I possess the godly Selem, the image of God, I have an Anochi too. So now he's just added to his request. I'm not asking you to just do it for Abraham. I'm asking you as well to count me as having zechut. And once a person recognizes that he's standing in the presence of God and that he has a breath of divinity within him, once he realizes that, what's the third word? Hine Anochi Nitzav. I am standing with a purpose. I am a nitziv. I'm actually in command here, not saying that he's command above God, but he's saying, I may just be a messenger, but I don't see my role as if I could carry it out, I could carry it out. And if not, I'm sorry, I rang the bell and they weren't home. I'm not taking my job description that way. I'm taking my job description that I was entrusted with a mission, and I'm going to do everything in my power. I'm going to change, I'm going to transform my identity to being a netziv, to being a commander, so to speak. I'm sorry. No, I apologize. I am going to stand and I'm going to, in English, we might say, grab a hold of myself. I'm going to grab a hold of the situation. And this is for us too. Sometimes we're sent on missions that we may or may not be fully equipped for. And we may or may not have a guarantee that the mission is going to be accomplished. But the Torah is telling us here and now, show up. Hine, recognize it's not just you, that God is with you. Recognize that you are an Anochi, that you are a partner with the divine that resides within you. And all you have to do is those two things, and then all of a sudden what happens to you? You become an netziv. You see yourself, it's a guided imagery, see yourself a certain way And then what happens? You actually become that. And so here he's saying, where am I? I'm on the En Hamayim. I'm at the edge or by the spring of waters. And notice what's so interesting. Originally, he went to where? Look, you're going to tell me in verse 11, where did he go towards evening time? He went to the Be'er. Please, this is the whole Torah is about these little nuances. When he gets there, it's a well. What are the conditions of a well? How do you get water from a well? You have to take a bucket. You have to send it all the way down to the water source, tilt it, straighten it, bring it all the way back up, take that bucket, tilt it into your pitcher, and then take your pitcher of water with you. That's where he gets to. This is the whole class. If you leave after this, I'll be satisfied. He goes to a place where you have to make all of this effort to get the water. And once he makes the declaration that God, it's you and me, and I know you could do it, and I know you'll do it for me, and if you're not going to do it for me, you'll do it for Abraham. I know you're involved in the situation. What happens? The place, remember I told you the Me'ara stood up? What happens here? What happens to the Be'er Mayim? What happens? It becomes a spring. One verse ago, one pasuk ago, it was a well. The next verse, it's called En. Yeah, I'll tell you the verse because I see that you're looking around. En Hamayim in verse 13. What is En Hamayim? How do you get water from a spring? The water rises to you. A Be'er Mayim, you have to go down to get the water. A spring of water, the water does what? It comes up like a fountain. Maybe that's a good imagery that we could have, where the water just comes up automatically. What is this telling us? Eliezer, I'm answering you just by the fact that the place that you came to was a place that you needed to dig deep. Now let's go in another fashion for a minute. I needed you to dig deep within your own well. I needed you to go deep inside yourself. I needed you to go within in order to do what? To bring out what's been sitting in there all along. Eliezer recognizing his divine Anochi, Nitzav, self, he's going into his well and he's literally drawing out of his own abilities and potentials. What happens in the next verse? It happens in the physical world because the water source is going to mirror Eliezer himself. He is now a spring. He is now bursting. He is now a source of water. Instead of needing water, he's the one who's able to do what? And this is the Eved modality, like we say about Moshe. Ha'ish Moshe was Eved Hashem. Same thing here. The Eved Eliezer, by the end, you're going to see, we're going to call him Ha'ish, ve'ha'ish mishta'eh. And you'll see it right away that he evolves into an ish. He's no longer just a servant once he recognizes that he has tremendous potential as well.
Vivien.
Oh, I unmuted her. Yeah, you could unmute yourself. I'm sorry. I thought it was a mistake. Oh, sorry. I didn't know if somebody wanted to say something, but anyway, let's continue. Vehaya. Now, what is
Vivien, excuse me for interrupting, but what you brought out is brilliant because along with it is the fact that he goes from Aror, a people that's Aror, to being blessed. So that goes with becoming a spring.
Who goes from being Arur? You're saying Eliezer?
He is from the Canaanim.
Yes.
So he's originally Aror. He's cursed.
Yes.
But now that he's involved in this Anochi and this mission and becoming a spring, his status goes from Aror to being blessed.
That's beautiful. I'll fill in the blanks. This is Gail Peltzer. This is her idea, which is beautiful. There is
It's not my idea. It's not mine.
okay, there is a midrash that says that Eliezer had a daughter, and he wanted his daughter to be the shidduch for Abraham's son. And that's possibly why Eliezer was a little bit ambivalent on how to proceed, because he really wanted his own daughter to be the daughter-in-law for Abraham. And that's why Abraham made him swear, so he wouldn't take Eliezer's daughter, because Eliezer's daughter, Eliezer Midamesek, could have been from the Canaanim, which were cursed. And now Gail's bringing to light that because they were cursed, but now rather than being cursed, you can change your fate. Yes. So it's a very nice, beautiful reading of it. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
He asked to be the sign, Vehaya Hana'ara Asher Omar Eleha, and it should be that the Na'ara, the girl, it's spelt without a hey, that I will ask of her to please tip her pitcher so that I could drink. And the woman who says, yes, drink, and I'll also give to your camels, that will be the one that I will know is the right one for Yitzchak. Uba eda, and then I will know that you did chesed im Adoni. And this word Adoni means my master. In other words, you'll be doing chesed for Abraham. And Vayihi, and it was, we know the Vayihi is tied up to that Hine, to the Vayihi, Vehaya, and it was, and lo and behold, and what do you know? It's not what do you know, of course, it's Bet Huterem Kilal Edaber. He barely finished speaking, and what's the word before Rivka? Vehine, Rivka, and this is who I want to spend most of my time talking about, and here Rivka comes out, the Rivka that was born to Betuel, the daughter of Milcah, who is the wife of Nahor, who's the brother of Abraham. I'm just going to press the pause button. We always know when there's a long lineage attached to a person, it means, like I had said earlier, she's not just nobility because her father, her grandpa Nahor, it's his city, but she's also has nobility. This is like one of those Hallmark movies that you already know from the first 3 minutes what's going to happen. It's telling us she is from Artsi, she is from Moladeti, she is Mibet Avi. She checks every single box before I even know a single thing about her. Her genealogy on paper, she's a 10 already. And on top of it, it starts to use a gazillion verbs with Rivka. And this is what's one of the things that we love so much about Rivka. I would venture to say she's possibly one of the most active of the imahot. She's a bullabuster. She's coming, she's going, she's moving, she's shaking. I want you to meet the early Rivka, because she's going to have a lot of phases to her life also. So what does she do? She comes and kada al shichma. Where is her pitcher? It's up on her shoulder, which means what? She's ready. She's prepared. There's gas in her tank. There's something on her. She's ready for anything that's going to come her way. And on top of it, if that wasn't a lottery winning enough, the next verse, Vehane'ara tovat mar'eh. On top of it, she's beautiful. And tovat mar'eh doesn't just mean physically beautiful. It means she's pleasing. Anybody who sees her sees tov, sees a sense of a beauty and completion and so many beautiful things that come with that. And she's not just tovat mar'eh, she's me'od, exceedingly. And she's also, in case anybody was worried, the Torah is going to confirm she's a betulah. She's never been with a man before. They'll go further and explain that a betulah is ish lo yida'ah She was never with a man. And here is the beautiful part. Vatered, she goes down to the spring and she fills her kada and she brings it up. Does it make sense? Because I told you that if she needed to do what? If she needed to get water from a be'ed, she would have to tap into it and go all the way down. So she starts to go down, vatered, but when she gets there, what is it? It's a spring. She goes down, what'd you say? Hamayim alu. Thank you. The water comes up to greet her again. When you rise to the occasion, everything in your, some days, zippity doo dah, everything's going my way. Sometimes when things are going your way, they just, having a good day. What happens? She made her day go the right way. She came ready for action. She comes with her pitcher on her shoulder. She comes ready for action. She sees these people and she's going to be ready. And look what happens. She fills up her pitcher before, I'm looking at my mother, she has her sambusak in the freezer before the guests even come. She's ready for action. Send anything you want my way. I am ready. My freezer is full. You're not scaring me. Come on in. Who's that reminding us of? She's already anticipating, like Abraham, that she's going to be able to do what? To nourish the wayfarer, nourish the incoming person. And what does she do? Vayarot ha'eved likrata. She didn't even see him yet. He comes to her. But by the time he comes to her, she already has what? Her pitcher full and ready. Vayomer. And he says, could I please have a little bit water from your pitcher? He's sort of testing the waters, right? Vatomer. And she says, Sheteh Adoni. Please drink, my master. Uh-oh, we're shaking. Why? What were the magic words? Drink and I'll give water to your camels. She doesn't say that. We're shaking. We're holding our breath because she only says the first part. Shete Adoni. Vatemahed. We're also, if we want to get the sense of the Abraham, she is in a hurry. Like Abraham is when the angels come to him, he's zipping, he's zapping, he's moving, he's shaking. Vatered kada al yada. She brings her pitcher from her shoulder to her hand. She gives him to drink. And when he finishes drinking, she says, we were like a cliffhanger. We were so worried. She doesn't say this, it's over. And she's perfect. And she's stunning, and she's the right family. So she says, what? It's the little things. And what does she say? I'm also going to bring water for your camels. And some of the commentaries say a lot of beautiful things. She doesn't mention the camels until he finishes drinking because she doesn't want to rush him, like drink already. And she wants to let him have his full, have everything he needs. Step one, and then I'll go and I'll get for the camels. But first I'm going to take care. And I don't want to put you on the same level as the camels, you and the camels. It's a separate. Yes, that is very beautiful. So let's see. Vatemahed. Again, this zirizut, this sense of rushing. And what does she do? She rushes, vatarot, same like Abraham. She runs back to the be'ed, to the well. She goes to the well. And it's interesting that you're saying that. It's possible that for the camels, it was a well. There's so many ways you could read this. And I'll say this one thing, which is if you would have called it a spring here, you would have said, okay, big deal. Anybody could bring a hose and say, here, give all the camels to drink all they want. But they're going to call it a well here so that they could give her the credit for having gone through the physical exertion of bringing the water up for the camels. They want to say it wasn't so easy for her to bring it up because lefum se ara agra. Doesn't, in the wording, I don't know whether it was a magical well that turned into a spring. That would be exciting. I don't know what it was, but I just want you to notice that the wording isn't consistent. That the water source for 1 minute that was a spring, another minute is a well, and we have to believe it was the same water source, because why would she go to a well if she had a spring? Everybody's gonna, right? Who's gonna start drilling for oil if there's just a pump right there that you could take the oil from? So there's a lot of ways to read this beautifully to her credit, but to her credit, when she went to get the water for the camels, it says she went to the Be'er to bring the water. And now it says, please notice verse 21, what are we calling the man who in verse 17 was an Eved? In verse 21, he is an Ish. Veha'ish mishta'ela. The man is astonished by her. And again, I said, she's not only is she nobility, so she's probably wearing clothing that isn't really made for this type of sho'aveh mayim. Again, in Tanakh, sho'aveh mayim, the drawers, they were comparable to the tree choppers, mekoshesh etzim and sho'aveh mayim. They mentioned them in one breath. Those people were the blue collar workers who came with, combat boots and a plaid vest, and they were dressed a certain way and they did a certain type of work. But her in her outfit, it didn't make, she's picturing her in the high heels carrying all this water. It didn't fit. And on top of it, the Ish or the Evid probably came with an entourage. He has all of this money, all of this gold, all of these camels. He's traveling. Nobody would dare travel by themselves back in the day, because a caravan with so much wealth would need to be protected. And you could just imagine the scene where the strong, muscled guys are sitting like this, and she in her heels is doing all of the heavy lifting. And he's mishta'ela because why? She doesn't say, excuse me, man, you want to give me a hand? She's so happy to fulfill this mitzvah herself. And it's very much to her credit, but I wanted you to notice that the verbs that are used for her are all beautiful movement, vata'al, vatemale, vatomer, vatemaher, vatarotz, vatishav. The vatishav, this sho'eva, this idea of drawing out. What is she also drawing out? Remember I told you about the servant, that when he said, Hine, Anochi, Nitzav, he was drawing his best self out. She too, Vatishav, she's drawing from her deep within her well. She's bringing out that potential that she has within her. What's so beautiful about Rivka, because now we're gonna put her together. I didn't realize it's already almost time to end. So I'll try and make it quick. But what's so beautiful about Rivka, if I had to represent her with an element, I'd probably say she most resembles water. She is fluid. She is by the well. She is serving the water. If you had to give, they say there's the 4 elements. There's earth, water, wind, and fire. How would you see Yitzchak if you see her as water and she's a spring and she's moving and she's totally alive and vibrant and active? You might have seen possibly Yitzchak, who was now I'm doing this because she's literally a bottom-up type of person. She's digging from within herself to bring out. And all we know about Yitzchak at this point is he came this close to being a korban. He came this close to being ashes. And so maybe Yitzchak, and a lot of the Kabbalists will view Yitzchak in this way, and they'll say he was either a korban tamim, a perfect sacrifice that was never actually raised up in the altar, and they will also compare him to fire, because he was the one who absorbed or integrated a fire that would have come from the heaven. And now we have this persona who's all about water, and we have this persona, Yitzchak, who's all about fire. We're going to actually bring them together. And as they come together, we're going to say a few things. If I told you that Rivka here is so Abrahamic, because she leaves her land and she's so rushing to help the guests and she's takes on a lot of his qualities, there's another woman that's very similar, Ruth. She also leaves her birthplace and she also goes to a land that she's unfamiliar with. And she also goes without any children, like Rivka, and she also ends up birthing the next generation of kings. And so we start to say to ourselves, Rivka is a person, if we want to think about emulating the Imahot, we don't always think about Rivka. But one of the things that is said about her, and fast forwarding, I apologize, I didn't realize that it was so late already, when she finally does come, and she is, I should say this, so go to chapter 24, verse 61. I wanted you to see this because it's important to miss it. Actually, forget 61, you have to do this a second, which is 57. When the servant wants to take her home, what does her family say? Nikra lana'ara v'nish'ala et piha. This halacha. Halacha is, if you want to just say what kind of girl Rivka was, that in her station as a woman in Mesopotamia, they're giving her enough of a kavod to they get not just giving her a choice, they're consulting with her, they're asking her opinion, and obviously when they say this pasuk, this is halacha till today. You cannot force a woman to marry somebody without her consent. She is the property of her father, but she has autonomy when it comes to whether or not she wants to marry. You have to ask her if she is willing. So that's one verse. But then as we move forward, she says, what is her answer? One word. Elech. She's going to do the Avraham lech lecha, elech. Or the root, ba'asher telchi elech. She is going to, and there is something to be said for this spirit of going into the unknown, of trying something unfamiliar. This is our Rivka. And then finally, they bless her and they give her a gorgeous blessing. But I had taken you to verse 61. I wanted you to see Vatakum Rivka. Rivka now stands. She's rising to the occasion. And because she rises to the occasion, the servant is called Ha'ish. He takes the Ish, Vayikach ha'eved et Rivka vayelech. So the play on words is very beautiful. At sometimes when he's in comparison to when he's together with Rivka and she rises up, she pulls him up with her and he becomes an Ish. Then he goes back to his regular duties. He goes back to being an Eved. And here is the ending of today. Yitzchak comes ba mibo. It means that he may have been going back and forth. And where was he traveling back and forth from? Be'er lechai ro'i. Where do we know this place, Be'er lechai ro'i? Who called this Be'er a Be'er lechai ro'i?
From Hagar.
With Hagar, thank you very much, beautiful. Hagar, it was the place where she had given Yishmael to drink. Remember, she thought he was going to die, and then God shows her a Be'er, and she calls it Be'er lechai ro'i, because now I see that God is in my midst and in my, so what's Yitzchak doing? Why does he keep going back to that Be'er? There's a lot to be said about it. For today, I might want to say he was looking to balance out his sense of ish, his sense of fire. And I could go on further and say, maybe he was going to the Be'er to do what? To find a wife. Maybe he was going to the Be'er to find a wife. He obviously didn't find a wife. In the story of the servant, we don't know if he and his father communicated, and there's a lot written up about this as well. big drama, whether or not Abraham and Yitzchak communicated after the Akedah. We know nothing about it. There's a big, we always say, right? Where there's a void, where there's a silence, where the Torah doesn't tell us, that's where you're going to read the most commentaries, and most people are going to insert their opinions there. Yeah. Marilyn is saying it's the kiss of death when you try and set up your own kid, they automatically say, I'm not interested. Regardless, Yitzchak comes out, Vayetze Yitzchak, and this is very beautiful. It could be that until now, Yitzchak was in a place where he was sort of trapped. Look, he is a post-trauma victim. There's no question about it. He was literally bound and came within a second of being ashes. So he comes out and it says Lasuach Basadeh Lifnot Erev, which is very beautiful. They say that he was praying. They say he established Tefillat Mincha, because that's what you say before the Erev. It's possible. There's a lot of possibilities to read into this. The word Lasuach means that he was having a conversation maybe with God, because the Sadeh is a place of divinity. But he lifts his eyes. And what does he see? He sees camels approaching. Rivka lifts her eyes. And what does she see? She sees Yitzchak approaching. And this is one of the most beautiful verses in all of Torah. What does she do? This woman who's a go-getter, who's coming, who's going, who's moving, who's shaking, who's running. What does she do? She falls off of the camel. And not only does she fall off, the kids love this. Not only does she fall off of the camel, but what does she do? She says, who is this man who's coming to greet us? And the Eved, who now assumes the role of an Eved, because in association with Yitzchak, he is the Eved, he says, that's my master. And she takes her scarf and she covers herself. And this is where we say, later on with Tamar, when she covers herself with a tza'if, we say she wasn't looking to trick Yehuda. We'll talk about that story when we get to it, God willing. But it means she was getting ready to do what? To be betrothed. She was putting on the wedding veil. She thought she was about to get married. Here too, she puts on a tza'if, but for Rivka, there's even more to be said. It shows the greatness of the woman, that she could be, on the one hand, out in the world, vatelech, she could be the Avraham, she could be the go-getter, and at the same time, vis-a-vis her husband, she's like the moon. At sometimes she's going to wax, and at sometimes she's going to wane. The woman isn't relegated to be in a one-lane highway. She always has to be a certain persona. The Torah is giving license to say, she could be the Avraham, she could be the go-getter, she could be the one who's greeting the guests, she could be the one who decides her own fate, whether or not she goes, whether or not she marries. And at the same time, that same woman, this is what's so beautiful about Rivka, she's able to do what? She's able to be like the Shabbat. She's able to take a step back. She's able to take a back seat. She's able to come figuratively and geographically off her camel. She doesn't want to be what? I know we say, oh, she's clumsy. She wasn't clumsy. This was very, very premeditated. What does she do? She's saying to herself, I'm going to come off my camel so that I don't give the first impression to my husband to be that I am what? Above or superior. I want to be an equal with my husband, or however you want to read into these words. But the most beautiful part, and I'll end with this, is when he brings her to the tent. And there are, again, a lot of commentaries written. And it says in the last verse, in verse 17, it says, Vayivieha Yitzchak ha'ohela Sarah imo. He brings Rivka to his mother Sarah's tent. And he takes Sarah to be a wife. And he loves her, and he's comforted after his mother. There's a famous midrash that says, what was so comforting, and how did we know that Rivka was the perfect wife? There's the three signs. The cloud that was always over Sarah's tent returned. And the dough was once again fertile or rose again. Well, thank you, thank you. And the candles, the ner tamid, the everlasting fire. It doesn't say it in the Peshat, but there's something to be said here. Just if you want to just take it from the ohel sara imo, if you want to go with the Peshat, just use that. Where was he bringing her? He was not just home. What's a person's ohel? Person's ohel is their temple. It's their mishkan. It's their mikdash. And what was in the actual Bet HaMikdash? And maybe this is where the commentaries came and said, the anan, the menorah, which is the fire, the lechem apanim, which is the bread, the qualities that were in the Bet HaMikdash were inside Sarah's tent, because every mikdash, every house is, or I should say is a mikdash katan, or the Bet HaMikdash resembles every person's house and every person's home. And by saying that the cloud reappears, what do we want to do? When we want to emulate our imahot, we want to say, I want my home to be a place where the spirit, where the Shekhinah is going to reside, and where there's going to be peace, and there's going to be kedusha like the Mishkan, and there's going to be fire, and there's going to be bread. And this is what Rivka brings to the table for us. She brings the next generation, and I believe that she learns and is able to bring the past successes. You'll see next week, the Sarah Imenu learning to speak up. She's going to tell her son next week, Shema Bekoli, you listen to my voice. And at the same time that she's able to assert herself, she's able to do what? To be off the camel, to cover herself. This is the role that Rivka introduces us to. She's not Hine Ba'ohel, she's not Sarah, who they relegated just to the tent. She is Yotzet, she is out there. But at the same time, there is a place for her in the Ohel. And so I hope that we could learn some of these traits from Rivka. I hope that we're able to be citizens of the world, and at the same time have the purity within our own homes, within our own tents, and build families that will continue the legacy of Abraham, now Yitzchak, and moving forward to Yaakov. With that, I thank you all.